curtain's about to fall. We're gonna open your eyes so you can see who you're gonna call if you wanna be free. GLOBEBUSTERS! GLOBEBUSTERs!
Everybody to GLOBEBUSTERs. We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
All right. Hello and welcome to GLOBEBUSTERS Season 13, Episode 16. Tonight we're going to be doing an episode with Shane St. Pierre on the great sky clock in the sky. I'm joined by Zachary Zimbala. And of course, all proceeds, donations, super chats, and membership subscriptions go to Cami to help continue on the legacy that Bob left behind with this platform. Shout out to Cami for allowing us to continue it. Zach, how are you this week, sir?
Not doing too bad, man. I had some pretty cool things happen this week. Just kind of reminding me how special this place is. We did a thing on water the last couple GLOBEBUSTERS tech before this week. This week we covered Newton's laws. But we were talking about water and, talking to plants and just how important it is. And I got into a funk. Just around this time, a lot of memories come up, and I saw that F-16 pilot video with Bob in it. And he just didn't look, you used to see him Bob all big and strong, and that was more near the end, where he wasn't looking as, how I've been remembering him. I'm not saying I'm trying to forget Bob looking like that, but I like remembering him as, young Vero Bob, the big Bob. And I was just in a funk, and I was out there tending to my plants in the garden, and I was welcoming a new raspberry bush, this new raspberry bush that just started all by itself. And I was like, oh, welcome, friend, and it must have felt something, because I told it, I always tell all my plants, you're going to be safe here. I'm going to always make sure you got food and water and all that good stuff. And I was like, so please just grow. Just, you're safe now. You can do it. And went back into my funk. But I came back out the next morning, and I looked at this raspberry, and it must have felt it, because it grew like 8 inches overnight. Like this thing shot up. Like I was showing people on Ironworks the next morning, like look at this thing. This is insane. I've never seen a plant grow that fast. And like that, as soon as I saw that plant, I was out of my funk.
Nice, man.
Really, when you go observe this place and how awesome it is, and not just observe it, but, correspond with it. The plants are alive, the rocks are alive, everything is alive. And you can actually go out there and, have a back and forth with it almost. And when you do that, it's amazing how they respond. I'm just telling you, go out there and try it. Go talk to a plant, especially one that you planted, and see how much better it does than a plant that you plant and you don't talk to. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's some really significant stuff there. And Shane, how was your week, sir?
Fantastic, man. I like this new schedule. It was very restful. Worked a full-time job, get home, work on the press, do some stuff. Still have time to go do whatever, man. It's a nice, peaceful schedule. In the interim, though, I got to work on my turtle clock presentation most of the week.
Ooh, the old turtle clock in the sky, they say. Looking forward to getting into that.
Every day.
Are you ready to begin the Prezi, sir?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, lads.
How was your week, Alan?
It was fine. It was great, actually.
It was fine.
It was a good week. It was great. All right, here we go.
Glad to hear it.
Here we go, boys.
All right.
Ooh, I like the animation there. See, you went all out for this one.
Well, I didn't make the turtle come in from the side and then wreck the ball and then create this later as you asked because it was too hard and I'm lazy.
Well,
But I did add a bunch of actual stuff to the present instead of that super cool animation that you asked for.
the ripples in the water are almost a replacement. That's pretty cool.
Nice. All right, so this one's called the Great Turtle Cycle of the Sky, right? Or the Great Cycle in the Sky. And we're going to start with the concept really of time, right? So we're going to be deconstructing Saros cycles and celestial cycles, and we're going to be looking at the macro of the big cycle in the sky and the micro of the actual lunar cycle. And so we're going to try and understand the collection of cycles within cycles that make their appearance in the heavens as they mark periods really for time for all to know. We're going to see how the sky functions as a perfect clock, except most of the world has forgotten how to read it. I think that this is on purpose because the concept of time is one of the most thoroughly messed with concepts, I think, through all of human history, through things like changing the type of calendar from solar to lunar solar, between kings to adding intercalary years, days, leap years, time zones, daylight savings time, 12 versus 24-hour clocks, daylight savings transitions, like the to be able to track things chronologically through a series of leaps through types of calendars like that is excruciatingly difficult, as I found out when I tried to do it just once. Right, so it became almost impossible to keep up with the exact procession of days, hours, and minutes as they flow. And we've naturally sort of grown dependent on technology to tell us what time it is. And I think also that is by design, right? We all should be able to look up at our sky clock and know, the precise day, month, and year. What we have here is one of my favorite clocks. This is an old Germanic calendar for 2023. And it has pretty much everything you would need to know when you're looking at a clock. And so not a digital face of an iPhone that we have today, but an actual clock. And it is in, I don't know, old German maybe, but we know what this means. So it's arranged in a circle, symbolizing like the cyclical nature of time, mirroring the sky clock. The outer ring is the days and the seasonal markers. So we got the numbered days all the way around here. Outermost ring contains the numbers, the days of the year, divided into 12 segments for the month. So inner ring is counting days a month and days of the year sequentially all around. Those two things are different because they have lunar. This is a lunar-based calendar, and they do intercalary years. But the seasons are also over here: summer, spring, Frühling is spring, I think. Herbst is autumn. Where's that one over here? Winter. And then they have, of course, giving the seasons and marking the solstice and the equinox, which from that, they then mark the lunar phases, right, on the inner sides of this calendar here. This is all the lunar phases marked out, with the season, of course, taken from the Big Dipper, rotating around the inner. And then you have the zodiac symbol, right? So you have all the constellations, and you can trace the sun's path through the constellations. Literally everything here that you would need to predict eclipses, to know time, to know when festivals and traditions were coming, because they're written right on here, to know when to plant, to know when the seasons were coming, to know when to harvest. All of that is recorded here. And that's sort of the basics of chronology and clocks and calendars as we got to know it. But now they've taken, like they split cosmography into, cartography and cosmology. They've split timekeeping and calendars into two totally different things, and they are one and the same, right? Because here on Earth, they're based completely and largely on the path of the sun and the moon and the dynamic interplay between them, right? Now, this is a nice, easy projection of the path of a moon, right? And this is on the Mercator projection, so it's the one that most people are used to seeing on timeanddate.com, right? And it shows you this sinusoidal pattern. Of course, the sun does something exactly similar, just in between the tropics. Notice the moon goes a little bit past the tropics and a little bit outside and inside, as it tends to do. The sun stays explicitly within the tropics because the tropics themselves being defined by the sun's seasonal path here. But if we were to look at the same sinusoidal path on, say, an A projection, it looks almost like a perfect circle. Now, it's not a perfect circle. This is actually an ellipse, right? But it's so slight as to the actual progression of the path of the sun and the moon that it might as well be circular. And it's represented as circular. And of course, they make oscillating circles as they move from the inside to the outside, which can be treated as an ellipse for all intents and purposes. And again, this is the same path.
Yep. Real quick. So there's a non-perfect circular motion of the sun and moon above us, right? That intersect periodically. And as that's happening, that whole system, like as a whole, so to speak, is oscillating in different spots throughout the year, kind of like changing the. So like it's changed, like that's how it's changing. What's the word I'm looking for, Shane? So that it's not so that it doesn't occur in the same spot every time.
Right.
Like right.
Yeah, you got two intersecting oscillating circles that intersect at certain points. And if that was the case looking over 2D, we'd have an eclipse every month. But if you picture it in 3D, they're actually changing elevation and altitude, so they intersect much less often. But we'll definitely go into that. In a couple slides, I think. Real quick, here we have the same depiction of the same path we just looked at, this time displayed on the orthographic globe, which of course is another projection of the 3D coordinate system of the celestial, right? Right ascension declination translates directly into this. If you want to take this orthographic projection as your preferred projection, that's fine and dandy, right? Or if you want to take this one, it's all equally the same, all equally valid. But again, these paths are identical. And as we were just mentioning over here, it does migrate annually from tropic to tropic, and it changes height. And the height change is represented in this visual field over here as the sun having an inclined celestial arc, right? Whether it has an arc or an antarc depends on the season and the latitude. And over here, we can see it moving, actually. We can see it moving between tropic to tropic, right? Here's the inter oscillating circles of one. This is just one moon. This is the moon moving, and the sun being stationary, right? So the sun is moving on its annual path. The moon is following on its monthly path, but the sun is moving back and forth through its analemma as it oscillates. And you can see that as the stars turn, it puts it in a different zodiac every 12 or every month or so, right? The sun progresses throughout the zodiac about every month or so. And that's what we see. Now, the equation of time and all of the dynamic systems that we have on Earth are actually caused by the sun and the moon. If we think about tides, right, they're caused, the semi-diurnal oscillating tide that we have is caused by the interplay and also the precession of the sun and the moon. Whether you believe it's gravity or some other electromagnetic effect actually makes no difference, as it is determined by their proximity to and near each other, regardless, right? The spring and neap tides are the highest and the highest highs and the lowest lows, and they only occur when the sun and the moon are together, or more accurately, when the moon is in its phase, which is its new moon phase next to the sun. That's the only time you get the highest high tides. But that's a different presentation. What we're concentrating on here is how you can symbolize the path of the sun and the moon as frequencies, right? And that's how you get tide predictions. You get harmonics, and it's called harmonic constituents. And they have the M2 constituent, in which they use harmonic analysis to predict tides, right? Not based on gravitational waves. No. Based on this harmonic interface. And they do a series of interpolation to depict when the next high is high and the lowest low will happen.
Shane, did they mathematically extract a harmonic series here to like predict the tides and then attribute it later to, different forces to backwards engineer their cosmological beliefs?
Well, with tides, it's a little bit different because they actually trick everyone. They have the two dynamic theories. They have the equilibrium tidal theory, where they can pretend that Newton and gravity and everything is uniform and everything is magic. And then they have the actual dynamic tidal theory, which takes into account topography, tidal basins, infodromic points, and tidal constituents. So they talk about tides hula hooping through all sorts of around the earth, but that only exists in their theory of equilibrium tide, which assumes a whole bunch of things that aren't real. And then the one that they use to actually predict tides, where this one comes from, is the dynamic tidal theory, which leaves out Newton's laws completely. So a little bit different, but yeah, they do tend to backwards engineer and make whatever the new observation is fit the backwards bullshit, as they say. But this one, yeah, so another depiction of the same intersection of the sun and the moon. This is actually the equation of time from the Wikipedia, and we're seeing it play out over the flat Earth over here from our boy Habitat Verdadero, which I think
that's awesome. I really like that.
Good shout out to Habitat Verdadero. Good dude.
We steal all his stuff. He's really cool about it. Well, this one he stole from me, so I guess it's mutual, right? So I steal, he steals.
There's a mutual theft. There's a mutual theft going on.
It's all good, yeah. But he does a really good representation of exactly what, like, I went to go depict something, and I'm like, oh, he already did it. Perfect. That's just what I wanted to show.
Isn't that awesome?
It's exactly what the harmonic interference of the sun and the moon portrayed as the equation of time over flat Earth, right? And you can see how they intersect. You can see the sun doing its analemma to each observer everywhere it's at. And you can see it keeping pace with the solar and sidereal time. So historically, man, right, us, we have used this to measure time. Our day is based on that. The length of a time and an hour is based on the cyclical nature of the sun. So the historicity of solar and lunar cycles as measures of time.
Can you go back real quick to the yeah. So they move in like a circle, like an ellipse, but we perceive the analemma like the figure 8. So that's just a product of our perspective then?
It is. It is. Yep. And we definitely go into that specifically in a video in a couple slides where I'll show that in the azimuthal grid and how that creates itself with the migration and the changing of height of the sun and the moon that we're seeing here, right? So right here, you can see it right here actually. Yeah, it's only portrayed here. But the sun is actually doing more than a 2D dance. It's going up and down as it moves to the top of the tropic.
Right. Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Now, would you think on a globe that's how we see the analemma from the north, just like that? Now, from the southern hemisphere, would you say that they should see it exactly the same, a smaller circle on their top half and a wider circle on their bottom half?
Well, on the globe, I mean, wouldn't it be symmetrical?
It would have to be symmetrical.
Like they explain it was so like it's on the if you get a globe, the analemma is portrayed like this in this infinity symbol, and their explanation is I think axial tilt somehow. Like the tilt means that it doesn't do it right, but if it is symmetrical, then it should, we should see it symmetrically. Stone has a great video on the analemma and whether it should be oblique like that or actually equidistant, and I think it's called something about the sun.
I always
quick couple thoughts about the sun.
It was right there, that itself a great proof that the heliocentric model is nonsense. Just the analemma. I know it takes a year to do it and all that good stuff, but it's worth it because when you see it, it's like, okay, how did they disprove this? Like whenever anyone does it, it always turns out like this.
Yep. So we've been using sort of the solar cycle and the lunar cycle and the interconnection between them to mark calendars forever. The Hebrew solar cycle was commenced with the year 1722, but we're going to go through a lunar cycle. So in the context of antediluvian times, which is what we're going to deal with when we're going to be dating the world via eclipse cycles through the eclipse chronometer, which we're going to go into, we have an intricately designed cycle that sort of works with the dating. If we look through ancient calendars for Babylon and Assyria, they used lunar cycles, and when you're trying to count years, it turns out the lunar calendar is the easiest one with which to count. And of course, that comes back to the giant sky clock, right? The giant clock that is in the sky. Now, you should be able to use the sky clock to tell you at the very least what time of day it is based on the sun, what time of month it is based on the phase of the moon, and what time of the year it is based on where the sun is within the stars. However, the current timekeeping system does not keep track of this. So regardless of what phase of the moon is, it can be the first, the middle, or the end of the month. That's the basis of our calendar. If we were to not do that, though, we would have a calendar to try and sync with lunar cycles. And we'll get into sort of the benefits and disadvantages of lunar, solar, and lunar solar calendars when you're trying to align with the sun and the seasons, the moon and its phases, or sort of a combination of both with intercalary insertions. So here's a little depiction of what I was just talking about, when you should be able to look at the sky clock and tell based on where the sun is, what year it is, right? Based on what phase of the moon is, what day of the month it is. In this animation, I'm just going to jump the month. I'm just clicking next month a couple of times. So we're going to see jump from January to February. And we're going to see the sun move between zodiacs. Right, so now I went to February and then jump to a different zodiac, and we're going to go to a different zodiac and a different zodiac. Every time you hit next month, the sun is in a different zodiac because monthly it progresses between the zodiacs. So imagine on flat Earth, the sun's going around its circuit, moon's going around its circuit. Also, at a similar but different time, the stars are doing their circuit, right? That's sidereal time. Sidereal is 23 hours, 56 minutes. Solar is 24 hours, right? That's where our notion of time comes from, as we started with. So we have the sun determining solar time and the stars determining sidereal time. And that the fact that there is that difference between them is why the sun appears to jump between zodiacs month to month, right? So this is another oscillating cycle that gives birth to a greater cycle. Because if they were the same, we would never have an oscillating cycle that translates throughout the year. Now, the way to keep track of that cycle can differ depending on what kind of calendar you have. And we're going to watch this video real quick of my buddy here talking about the only type of calendar that you should have, he says, is the lunar calendar with 13 months and 28 days. Now, this was the first video I saw of someone explaining there were different calendars. So I went on a bender of research after this, but we're gonna watch this real quick. Let me know if you have sound. Good, right?
Negative on the sound, Ghost Rider.
Negative, okay. I think I did it right. Share entire screen with audio. I didn't hit the button.
Our calendar is
Good
not
on the
quite
sound.
right.
All right.
We're supposed to have 13 months of 28 days. With one day, the day of resurrection, Easter, as a neutral day. That's our 365 days. We've actually got 13 constellations, not 12. This same calendar is very close to the Mayan calendar, but it's also very close to several ancient Sanskrit calendars. What does sept mean? 7. I thought that was the 9th month. What does oct mean? What does nov mean? What does dec mean? It's supposed to be the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th month. Jan is 11. Feb is 12. March is 13. April is our first month. Babies are born in the spring, the 1st of April, Easter. This is the start of our new year. This is the start of spring when the flowers start coming up, the grass starts coming up, the trees start leafing out, the babies are born. That's the first day. Our neutral day, day 1, the day we rest and celebrate the resurrection, the new beginning, the beginning of Christ. April is month 1. And then we lost a month in there. Where is it? What's it called?
So that dude was the first time I ever saw that video. I was thinking about, wait a second. Hold on now, wait. Started adding up on my finger, like, okay, well, 13 times, oh wait, hold on, times 28 is 364, plus 1 is 1. Well, then wouldn't that be perfect? And it turns out that's just a one type of calendar system, right? So we have the Gregorian calendar is a solar type calendar, but there is something called the Abysmal calendar, which is exactly what he just proposed. It's a system of 13 months divided into 28 days plus 1 additional day, which they do, the holiday. And the Abysmal calendar, so it keeps track of the seasons. They do a leap day set at the northern solstice, and it keeps track with it even has its own special notation. It turns out I looked into it a little bit. You can write dates in this 13-month system, and here's the notation that you would use to do so. Right? A little bit weird to us, but it's already being done. Right? There's papers on it. Here's one that says the outline with the Abysmal 13-month calendar and how all the ways it makes sense. Of course, it breaks down the 7-day week, which is integral, as we will see. And it's based on the lunar phasing, right? So if you were to try and make a calendar system of months based on new moon or full moon or when the moon was, right? If every month started with a new moon, was halfway through to full moon, and then ended with waning crescent, like, oh boy, could you start telling the days of the month solely based on looking up at the sky clock, right? And in fact, if you've ever seen this meme before, They call it the turtle, right? The turtle meme. It's said that the ancients used the calendar based on this. And if you look at every turtle, it supposedly has 13 moons and 28 days, or 13 little circles on the inner circle to denote the 13-month calendar, and then 28 tiny circles around the outer edge, and that's supposed to denote the days of the month. And if every month had 28 days, it'd be 364 days. So this is again saying the same thing as our dude was saying. And this would give us, some amazing benefits. If it was exactly 13 months and 13 months of 28 days, then you'd get some continuity. You'd get some harmony with math. You'd get it to align with the lunar phase. What it wouldn't do, though, is line up with seasons. The seasons would start to progress and slide annually. Spring would start with a different month all the time, and eventually your cyclical seasons clock of knowing when to plant would be all messed up. So it turns out you have to have a little bit of a different system to start tracking that. But again, some other benefits of the 13-month week, if you were to the 13-month year, 28-day month, here's how it would break down, right? 7 days would be 1 week. 14 days is exactly 1 fortnight. If you've ever heard that, no one uses it anymore. I wonder why. 28 days, 2 fortnights are exactly 1 month. 91 days would be exactly 1 quarter. 182 days giving you a semester made up of 2 quarters, 364 days giving you 4 quarters, 2 semesters, right? 26 fortnights, 52 weeks, 1 year. It's a nice mathematical symmetry to it there. If we take a look at our current timekeeping system, instead of getting a drift of seasons, we keep the season specifically on the same day all the time, right? That's what our leap year does. It keeps seasons arriving in the same time. Spring is always March, April, and fall is always August, September, October, and then winter is always November, December, January, etc. But what drifts, or what happens to drift, is the phase of the moon. So you can see here, this is a 2022 lunar calendar, and January started with what looks like full moon or new moon. I can't tell. It's black and white. One of those two, and then it oscillates all the way through into the middle, and then all to the end. And by the end of the 12th month, you're starting with a waxing crescent moon. You're in the middle of a new moon, and you're ending with whatever the opposite of that other one is. So the drift of the lunar cyclicality has thrown off the seasons, right? And the same thing happens every year. So this is the next year, and although it's still drifting, it's continuing its drift if you were to align it, right? That's the cyclical nature of the moon. And our calendar is trying to account for it in 29, 30, and 31 day a month, which is silly. So it turns out there's benefits to each, right? The solar calendar, if you were to use 13 times 28, and the leap day has the fixed 28-day months, which are shorter than the synodic month, which is just the lunar phase month, right? It takes 29.5 days for the moon to go from new moon to new moon again. That's what this is. And then this causes the lunar phases to drift rapidly throughout the calendar. So it's the same problem that we have with our Gregorian. If you were to use a totally lunar calendar, which is the Islamic calendar is, then the months would always match the synodic month, and every month would start with new moon, and there'd be no drift. You would lock this drift out by the month, because your months would be set up based on this periodicity. So what happens, though, is that you lose your drift with the seasons if you do this. So the seasons start to drift. So you need another intercalary system to offset every couple of years to make sure the seasons line up with your holidays and festivals. And then you have the combination, which is a lunar solar calendar, which is what Hebrews used to use and what the Chinese was, which is alternating exactly 29 and 30-day months, so that the average and the mean is 29.5 days. And then you add in leap months, not leap days, not leap hours, leap months, to stay in sync with the solar year so that your seasons start at the same time.
Yeah, that was like the coolest thing I had heard about the Hebrew calendar, was that this year it started, on, we'll say, April 1st. But the next year it went around, and the winter wheat wasn't ready by April 1st. It hadn't been harvested yet. So your year didn't start yet, according to the Hebrew calendar.
Yep.
Be like, nope, we need to wait till after the winter wheat's harvested, and then that next full moon will start our new year. And that kept them always in line. That's where that leap month right there comes into play.
Crazy, right? When you think about it, but you need to do one of these things to keep up with all the cycles, because they don't match, right? That's what we started with, the equation of time. we know the time it takes for the moon to do a circuit is different than the time it takes the sun, which is different than the time it takes the stars. And that's the problem that we're having now. If you know, a good example of the lunar calendar is the Islamic calendar, right? Total lunar calendar. They have this exact thing. Their dates start differently. Everything starts differently. Their years are differently. Every month length between 29 and 30, you see, 30, 29, 30, 29, all the way through. And that their year is actually only 354 to 355 days, 10 days shorter. And then they add intercalary days. So they have this shift, right? It grants through the calendar by 11 days each year. However, perfect synchronization with lunar phases. So their calendars, and based around their festivals for their religious practices, is all lunar tied so that their festivals stay in line. So the sort of happy medium between all these is something called the Metonic cycle, this is the Wikipedia picture, right? This is something that comes up when you're trying to match all of these cycles, right? So we have the lunar, the solar, and the lunar solar calendar. So real quick, we'll summarize. Solar calendar, fixed 28 to 31 days, aligned with the seasons. That's us. That's what we have. Lunar calendar 29 to 30, drifts with the seasons, aligns with the moon. As examples are Islamic and Sumerian. And then you have the lunar solar, where you have a kind of a mixture of both 29 and 30, but it aligns with leap months using, every 2 to 3 years. And so the Metonic cycle is something that comes up as a way to remedy and synchronize the lunar and solar calendar, right? So it's a 19-year period that aligns lunar phases with the solar year, enabling lunar solar calendars to maintain seasonal and lunar synchronization. So it does something called this 19 tropical years, which is really just 235 synodic months, which is we went over a period of 29.5 days, which is also called the lunar cycle. And they take this period and they divide it between this to get an offset so that they can align the solar and lunar calendars, which naturally drift. So the Metonic cycle is a well-known way to try and synchronize solar and lunar calendars. Now, with all that being said, we can get into most of the material from this presentation on eclipses and eclipse chronology and synchronization comes from this dude named J.B. Dimbleby, who was a friend of Alex Gleason, who wrote in the same year, the same time. This book, he wrote a couple books, one on complete biblical chronology, which he completely synchronizes dates of the Bible and corroborates those separately and with independent modern sources. And then this separate book, which he published at the British Chronological and Astronomical Association. If you read the back of it, it's nothing but glowing recommendations from his peers, talking about people like George Airy and the Astronomer Royal and all the good people that we reference from the Royal Astronomical Society. All gave this book super high praises. But what it's called is All Past Time by 5 Lines of Astronomical Time. And what he tries to do is date the world based on 5 different simultaneously corroborative forms of astronomical chronology. So he uses things like the moon cycle, the lunar cycle, the completely separate solar antediluvian cycle, the transits of Mars and Venus, and actual biblical chronology. So those 5 things he uses to line up and date all the historical events of society. We're going to go into his book a little bit because what he did with eclipse cycles is amazing. Right? Instead of dating eclipses by every 18 years and doing a completely stretched out Saros cycle like what NASA or quote Fred does today, he did a completely chronological analysis of eclipses. Like if you watch from today, from 100 years from today, what eclipses happen in order, not separating them from solar and lunar, but looking as sequential chronological order in which they appear in. So he uses something called the intercalary days, which is we just went over how the Hebrew calendar has to have those months inserted, as Zack pointed out. Turns out when you're chronologically trying to date things, those intercalary insertions are super easy to track and vital to try and find out when things actually happened and how long ago. So our boy Dimbleby here tracked the insertion of intercalary periods of scripture into the Bible using the feast days and the calendar. And then he used these intercalary periods. He's noticed they were employed at the same time with remarkable scientific precision, proved by the application of the lunar cycle test. So he went through all the dates of this history using the eclipse chronometer of the lunar cycle. And that
So these guys weren't just a bunch of goat herders sitting out in fields looking up at the stars?
we're gonna end with some of the ancient devices, Zach, and they are so precise. It like drops. Like I had to go look up a whole bunch of stuff to even understand what I was looking at to see all the things it was predicting. It was like, oh man, what were they doing? How did we become so retarded? Is a better
Yeah,
question.
I was just about to say we're retarded. That's why.
How did we get this way? Like we were so smart at one point, man. So yeah,
Well,
so
I bet as children they were taught that calendar. You
right, they
know,
were taught the actual calendar and how to track it based on the sky to sync it up, and they
just
weren't.
looking up. Yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
on a piece of paper in front of them down, during the daytime. No, they took them out at night and said, hey, when it's like this, it's this time of year. You look up and you see these stars. Don't worry. Next year, it's going to be the same. Don't worry about it. We already know. Same
Yeah, but
stars will be right there.
but now it's, oh, did you want to know what time it was? Well, buy my device. It'll always tell you
Yep.
what time it was.
Yep.
You see those stars, boy? Look up. They'll never be there again. We're hurling through the solar system.
Right? But yeah, you'll never see the same one again, except for next year where you'll see all the same patterns. Huh? Oh yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's because it's really far away. Huh?
Just how far? As far as needs to be so that it never changes forever. That's how far. It's like when you ask your parents, like, how much do you love me? This much. Like, forever.
Infinity. Yeah. Love it.
All right. So now that we familiarized ourselves with intercalary insertions for calendars, right? We went through the solar and lunar cycle and how you have to offset so that they align. Now we can use that to track references in the Bible and historical references of intercalary periods. So that's what our boy Dimbleby did. But in doing so, he encountered the same problem I did when trying to chronologically analyze eclipses. The jumps of calendar throw you off. If you're going to try to date an eclipse that happened several hundred years ago and then track through your calendar sequentially to see when it would happen today, you're going to be way off because of all these things that we just went over. If you're going to count from a lunar cycle into a solar calendar, that's not going to work. You're going to have a bad time, right? So what Dimbleby figured out is that the years in the Bible are lunar, the Hebrew calendar, right? He went through and says that therefore the months have alternately 29 and 30 days. And then using this as a framework, because he knows, they now observe by the Jews, Turks, and the Chinese, then therefore the new moon will occur on the first day of each month, because the moon, he's referencing the synodic cycle, 29 and a half days. So the moon is like a great clock in the sky, new at the beginning and full in the middle. So as we went over earlier, when you're going to use the same type of calendar, then you can successfully date it, right? So again, referring to our turtle here, you got to be able to have the same sort of framework, be able to know what sort of calendar you're counting towards. Now, on to using the cyclical nature of the moon and the sun about eclipses. I think I have a video here. Here we go.
Oh, 1 second. Restart it. I got to turn your audio back on.
And you turn my audio off?
It was echoing. You're good, though. Good.
All right.
Oh, the ecliptic. We're talking about the tilt at which the sun appears to each observer, right? Because it does its progression annually from season to season, and it moves from tropic to tropic. It actually gets higher and lower, and it is that path that appears to us to move within a 23.4 degree gap of our azimuthal grid, or our local alt-az grid. So if you look at what the sun does, we typically think that they're moving around and they're intersecting. But when we're talking about eclipses, we're talking about much more than the frequency at which these two circles intersect, because they're also in 3D on a different path. The sun's at this slight ecliptic path, about a 5 degree tilt, and the moon's a little bit off of that, as you can see. So because of this intersection, the rate at which they actually intersect is much less, right? So otherwise you'd have an eclipse every month. Ecliptic is the sun's tilt from a base level that we observe in our grid that goes from here to here. This is the 23.4 degree gap that we notice, that we observe in the sky, right? From the sun's precession. But if we look up to what the sun is actually doing, as it goes from tropic to tropic, it's going higher and lower. See, it starts off really high in the Tropic of Cancer, goes really low to go out to the Tropic of Capricorn over here. So what that looks like to us, of course, the sun progressing in this band, right, above and beyond. So the observation is this, and then they contrive it back to get a ecliptic at which the whole solar system is actually tilted at to make sense of the sun's angle and parallel light rays. So they take this observation of this 23.4 degree band with which the sun migrates, and then they created a whole model that said the solar system is actually tilted at this angle and that all light is parallel and it's actually at a balanced flat axis, but the whole solar system is tilted 23 point or whatever. So when we're talking about eclipses, we're talking about when these two intersect. These would be the nodes, which we can see here. These are the ascending and descending nodes. This is commonly what gets misconstrued as Rahu and Ketu. And these are the intersection points at which they actually intersect. What the sun's ecliptic was compared to the moon's track, how they're at different inclines, and how those separate inclines mean that the intersection is much less frequent when talking about the eclipse cycle, the lunar cycle, and the great astronomical year.
Right, because it's at a different height, it inclines and intersects much less frequently. Let me see if I can. Yeah, so it's at a different height. But here's a nice animation. We're going to watch an eclipse from beginning to end. And we're going to see that these little knots above the solstices and the equinox, but we're going to see the nodes pop up, also called Rahu and Ketu. And when the moon and the sun intersect at one of these nodes, if it's at the ascending node, then it has a solar eclipse. If it's at the other node, then it's a lunar eclipse. Right, so this is a different interpretation of a syzygy, where the heliocentric model would have to say the alignment of the sun, moon, and the earth, right? But in our world, it's just an alignment of the sun and the moon in a specific order, and that there's sort of a reverse syzygy, in which case the moon is at the opposite node, and that's how you get a lunar eclipse, right? So if the intersection points appear to move forward as the sun, we're jumping forward from the sun, giving it the appearance of moving backwards, right? Because we're progressing time fast, as we did in the beginning. And when we're looking at the sun and the moon here, when they're going to intersect, now we see a node finally. Right, so if the sun and the moon meet at opposite knots, a lunar eclipse happens. So if the sun and the moon are here, if they meet at the same knot, a solar eclipse happens. So if the sun's over here and the moon's over here, lunar eclipse. If they're at opposite nodes, if they're at the same node, solar eclipse. I thought that's one of the coolest observations about this. Right, what's dynamically causing a lunar eclipse is that the sun's always at a specific offset to it. We should look into that with our magnetic polarization and offset fields from the Faraday effect that we were talking about before. Probably something happening there. Here is from the observer's position, right, how an eclipse would occur. This specifically was one back in 2017, and it was for this observer in, looks like, southern US. And of course, as the sun and the moon progress around, they seem to align to the observer, and that's why there's a specific band at which the eclipse occurs, because they only occur for each observer, because it takes into account the perspective at which you would see them intersect.
That is awesome.
So we get our own personal eclipse relative to our laddie? Is that what you said?
When you graph them out, they're all little bands all over the map, right? And they're only those tiny bands because they're only observable from within those bands, because only those people are enjoying the same perspective, right, of the overlaying sun and moon.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Nice. All right, making good time, moving right along. We're going to go into, I think, the explanation of the Saros cycle and some lunar periodicities. So we'll just hop right into this part, because these lunar periodicities are going to be the backbone of predicting eclipses. It's how, this lunar cycle works every 18 years, how the same conditions realign to occur for the same type of eclipse. And then that same eclipse will occur 3 times. And then when it recurs on itself again, it's called an exegetilous cycle. Hold on, let me see. Excelligimus. There you go. Excelligimus cycle, which is
Sounds like something out of the Harry Potter movie.
yeah, really like Expelliarmus, bro.
Just cast a magic spell on us.
It's when it's 3 cycles of 18 years, so that the one eclipse that would be oscillated 30 degrees around the world would then occur back on the same spot. I kind of butchered that, but we'll go into it for sure. We're going to watch how I explain eclipses using these 3 periodicities, and then we're going to watch how my heliocentric buddy Steve explains the very same thing. And we're going to look at similarities and difference in an aim to see, is eclipse prediction heliocentric or geocentric? But essentially, these are the components, right? What is the Saros cycle? It's that synodic, or when the synodic, draconic, and anomalistic months intersect and repeat, which means the moon's lunar cycle, the moon's position, and its ecliptical orbit, and when it eclipses the same node. That's what all three of these mean independently, but we're going to go into those individually real quick right now.
No audio.
And these three cycles
Okay.
and the harmonics between
No,
them
you're good,
determine
you're good,
when,
you're good.
where, and how solar and lunar eclipses occur. The Saros actually arises from a natural harmony between three of these periodicities. So the synodic month, the animalastic month, and the draconic month. So let's define them. First, the synodic month, the time between two successive new moons corresponding to the moon's orbital period relative to the sun. What that means in reality is the luminosity of the moon, which is directly correlative to the sun's position, right? Because the further the sun gets away from the moon, the brighter its luminosity becomes. The closer the moon gets to the sun, the lesser its illumination becomes, right? So the synodic month is the timing of this periodicity. Its mean length is something like 29.53 days. The animalastic month is the interval between two successive passages of the moon through perigee, right? Remember, in an elliptical orbit has perigee and apogee, perigee being the closest, apogee being the furthest point in its cycle. The animalastic month then is the interval between two successive passages of the moon through its closest point. And then its mean length is 27.55 days. Then you have the draconic month, which is the period between two consecutive passages of the moon through the same orbital node. So remember we talked about Rahu and Ketu and the lunar nodes? Well, this periodicity describes the time it takes for the moon to go from one node and then all the way back through the same node again and again. The mean average is 27.21 days. Notice they're all close, but all a little bit different, and they do line up ultimately. So let's break up what makes up an actual Saros cycle. Well, within the Saros cycle, you have, again, the synodic, draconic, and animalastic month. So again, synodic, moon returns to the same phase. Draconic, moon aligns with the same node. Animalastic, moon returns to perigee, the closest point. After one Saros cycle, or lunar cycle, to 18.03 years, these three inner periodicities realign almost perfectly, creating similar eclipse conditions. So, the lunar cycle is 18 years, 10 or 11 days, and 8 hours. Now, why? Why is it that long? Well, it's 6,585.32 days, or 223 synodic months, or 242 draconic months, 239 animalastic months. The extra 10 to 11 days account for the lunar distance around the Earth, and the 8-hour offset means that eclipses in the Saros series shift westward by about 120 degrees longitude between each cycle. Now, longitude, of course, having to do with time, because the hour angle transformation to convert longitude to right ascension just means 4 minutes per degree, meaning that it's just the time component of the celestial system, which equates to the longitude, which is the angular separation on the graticule. So it is this 8-hour offset actually that determines the shift. If it was not for this 8 hours, the eclipse would occur exactly where it did before, and we'd have an ever repeating cycle. Because of this shift, it means it occurs at a slightly different place each time, and that is what sets off the cycle. And that means that it's happening in a different spot in the zodiac each time, and its track around the cycle will create the greater celestial cycle that we're talking about. It depends on whether the first eclipse of the series occurs east of a rising or a falling node, and which of the two nodes that the moon is crossing when it's on the ecliptic. And that determines the direction in which it shifts by 120 degrees, right? So it takes about 18 years for the teams of eclipses that make up this cycle to make a 360 around our realm. That is its cycle, right? So the 651 or 649 great astronomical year is a 2-revolution cycle. It's got 2 revolutions of one cycle of 325 years and then another cycle of 326 years alternating. And of course, each one of these has 18 times 70, which would be 1,261 eclipses in each cycle, pairing, or Saros cycle. After one Saros, the moon will have completed roughly a whole number amount of synodic, draconic, and animalistic periods, and the sun-moon geometry will be nearly identical. That means the moon will be in the same phase at the same node, and it'll be from the same distance at the same spot, almost. So the same eclipse happens every 18 years for a total of 36 times in 651 years.
So that's
a grand eclipse cycle of 651 years contains something like 2,520 eclipses.
So
and that is the chronometer with which we will use to date our civilization.
Definitely a bit much, a lot of information there, but we'll start real quick with how it repeats, right? We went through how it moves 120 degrees westward, right? So this is the amount of longitude. Here's our heliocentric lad explaining the same thing, how these periodicities align to the Saros cycle, the same amount. And it says, hey, each time it occurs, it'll be this much further west, right? So that's the result of that 8-hour leftover, because, of course, the stars precess around flat Earth according to sidereal time. So if you give it 8 hours, it occurs a third of the way around the world, right? Because the stars have moved that much further. Now, what this looks like is you get a repeating cycle of eclipses. So this eclipse right over here has this shape, occurs in 2117. 18 and a half years later or so, it occurs the same eclipse, same shape. 18 years later, a third of the world offset, 120 degrees offset. Now 18 years again, same eclipse, same shape, shifted a third of the way around the world, right? So this happens in 2117, 18 years later in 2135, 18 years later in 2153. That is how the heliocentric model characterizes eclipses. They use this Saros cycle, which is why they're spread out between thousands of years, because each one is within 18 years. So they're only characterizing those of similar characteristics, and then they're lining them up into these big, long Saros cycles, in which they tell the user almost nothing, right? The other thing is that they separate them into solar and lunar chronologies, and the texts are completely different, even though the characteristics they use to predict each are the same, with slight variations. And so these, again, are all 3 different types of eclipses. This eclipse over here, again, is happening 2171. 18 years later, same shape, 2189, shifted a third of the way around the world, and then 2207. And when this eclipse happens a 4th time, and it happens right back where it started, that is what I was trying to say earlier, extelogimus cycle, right? That's when that lines up. That's 3 Saros cycles lined up. Now, if we were to picture what that would look like, right? We have sort of the sun and the moon at a different offset. As the moon aligns, it doesn't intersect because it's at a different height as we were looking. That's why only every 606,583 days does it align with what we just showed there, right? So it's because it's weaving up and down every month. It's not going to hit the sun to cause an eclipse. So if we were to graph out what the difference would be, right? We have the spinning sidereal stars around the flat Earth. And again, if you're to wait 8 hours, and the same eclipse that happened over here would then happen over here, would then happen over here, would then happen right where it started, right? That's what the 8-hour difference is, roughly a third of a day. If you were to take a series of eclipses and to map them out, it would start like this: Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, Series 4. They'd occur like this. We're on 5 now. We're on 6, 7 around the world, 8, no, because they have partners and they always appear in pairs. And this is going to go up to all the way to 18. And we've completed one whole circuit. Now, this is the same characteristic of eclipse happening and happening and happening as it shifts and rotates and shifts around the world. Now, just for fun, we're going to ask a heliocentric lad to explain most of what I just explained through his interpretive framework. And we're going to see if it's very different from what I just explained. All right. So I'm going to ask my friend Steve over here. Steve's, well, I'll let Steve tell you. I got some questions about eclipses and the eclipse conditions and how and why eclipses occur. Do you have any qualifications that would help you to answer some of my questions?
Hi, I'm Steve Bleiler. I'm a professor of mathematics and statistics at Portland State University.
Yeah, all right, Steve. Well, that's cool. Seems really complicated to be able to figure out when and how the next eclipse is going to happen. And there's a lot of people that seem convinced that you need NASA and heliocentricity and mass attracting mass and gravitational predictions with the three-body problem to predict it. Do I need any of that in order to predict eclipses?
It's really just the sort of mathematics that you learned in grade school and an understanding of what we in music would call harmony. When is it that various tones, frequencies line up with each other?
All right, so then how would I start to do it? Would I need to get some spreadsheets? Do I need to get a big canon of eclipse predictions from NASA? Do I need a giant tomb? Do I have to buy a special eclipse book from the Mayans? Or what do I do to start?
You can start in your backyard with a conveniently placed a pole, maybe a tetherball pole or maybe a light pole across the street, and a good timepiece so that when things are happening. And if you have the same place to sit every night, you can pick a celestial object like the sun or the moon or a bright star or one of the planets, and you just time when it goes by that pole. The other thing, if you have some way to measure angles, protractor or even just two pieces of wood with a single nail stuck between it so that you can measure the angle between the horizon and the object you're looking at when it goes through past your pole. That's all you need to do.
Oh, numbers, those numbers. Oh, I see. So we're going to have to use like the heliocentric mass of the moon calculated from the angular size formula based on an optical diameter of 0.53 degrees and Newton's law. We're not going to have to use just Kepler's law. We're going to have to use the heliocentric math, I bet, right? Is that what you're going to say?
Basically, you get that knowledge by just sitting in your backyard and looking at the heavens.
What?
It's totally free. And again, all you need is a vertical stick, a reasonable timepiece. That can be the two bright stars in the bucket of the Big Dipper, which actually form a giant clock, and a place to sit. And you just need to know where something is once, and then some time later when it reappears there. That gives you how fast its apparent motion is in the heavens, and that's all you need to know.
Oh, so you're saying all I need is an observation and a periodicity? All I need to know is how long it takes for said observation to come back around based on the cyclical nature of the sky? Are you saying that all I need is actually the periodicity and not the constant? Wow. Well, how would I use just an observation like that to predict eclipses?
For example, to do eclipses, there are sort of three numbers we need to know. And basically, there are three different kinds of months. And they come from the way that the moon goes around the Earth. You could measure the time from the new moon to the new moon. In other words, when does the moon actually line up with the same position that the sun is in going around the heavens? When do they line up? That's called the synodic month. That's a $10 word for a 1-cent concept. And that actually works out to be 29 and a half days. But of course, the more accurate your watch is, you get a much better number. Okay? So that's one number we need to know. Another number we need to know is another $5 word called a perigee. That's when the moon is closest to the Earth in its orbit. And we can tell that by the size of the moon. The closer it is, the bigger it looks. So we can actually time.
Pay attention to that, because when I'm going to be doing the differences after this in a moment, he's deducing the distance that the moon is from the Earth based on the apparent lunar disk size. Meaning if it was traveling from tropic to tropic and changing its apparent size to us as it goes further and nearer, he's basing the distance off of that. Okay, that's what he's saying.
Time that month. And it turns out that that month is quite a bit shorter, 27 and a half days. And this is something, again, that you can measure in the privacy of your own bed.
And just the fact that they're different, just so we understand, 27 and a half versus 28 and a half versus 29. If the moon and the sun are both orbiting, right, or both going around, if the moon does a complete circuit, but it's trying to catch the sun, it also has to go a little bit slower, a little bit faster to match the speed of the sun. That's why it dips in valleys between 28 and 29. And that's how you get 27, right?
Backyard. For us, it's important to think of a third kind of month. And that's because we want the moon to come between the Earth and the Sun, a common plane, a common flat sheet.
Syzygy.
Well, don't they? No, they don't. As it turns out, the orbit of the moon's orbital plane, doesn't line up with the Earth-Sun plane. It's actually angled by about 5 degrees. So they don't line up. So it is only when the moon is in this area where those two planes cross, something called a node. That's what this is right here. This is a node. It's only when the moon is close to one of those that we have an eclipse. Well, as it turns out, to have an eclipse, there's a little interval that is about 34 degrees wide. So that's the angle in the sky, how wide it is. It's about 34 degrees wide, where if the moon happens to be in that 34 degrees when the sun is there, you get an eclipse. Okay? So the question is, how long does the sun lie in there as we travel around it and look at it out in the sky? Well, the sun moves about 1 degree a day. So to go through what's called an eclipse season, it takes about 34 days for the sun to go through it. Well, the moon goes around in 27, so every eclipse season, you're going to have at least one eclipse in there. You might have two if the moon goes through here. Only one, of course, if the moon is real close to the node. So this tells us that every year, every eclipse season, there are always two eclipses. Always. Somewhere on the Earth, you can see an eclipse twice a year. Okay? Eclipses are actually quite common. There can be as many as 7 in a given year. It just depends on the relative geometry. These are the tones of the moon, if you will. These are the 3 notes the moon is making.
All right, back to harmony,
chord.
harmonics, tidal constituents.
Well, they have a rough least common multiple. In other words, if I take 223 new moons, 242 node moons, 239 perigee moons, well, son of a gun, that works out to be the same number of days and almost the same number of hours for all of those 3 multiples. I've multiplied it out for you here. 6,585 days, 7 hours, 43 minutes in the case of the new moons to the new moons. About 5 hours longer for the perigees to perigee. Well, what does that tell us? That tells us every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, an eclipse very similar to the one that we just witnessed is going to occur in roughly the same place. What does the 8 hours tell us? That says it's going to be moved 1/3 of the way around the Earth, because 24 hours in a day. So that means that every 3 of those, or 1 excelligimus, okay, which is 54 years and 34 days, we're going to have an eclipse virtually identical to the one that we just witnessed, only twisted a little bit further north or a little bit further south, whether on this is a descending node where things are going down or an ascending node where things are going up.
All right, so that's my buddy Steve, who's a heliocentric lad with no agenda, just interpreting the celestial phenomenon through his interpretive framework and giving us what he thinks. I think that was very refreshing, right? We didn't get called retarded. He didn't try to frame it or obfuscate. Didn't try to change all the details of what he believes to be opposed to us. No, he just told me exactly the same thing as I told you guys. I think the only thing that we would even bicker about is the interpretation of those 3 different lunar periodicities. But essentially, he's talking about the same thing, right? A Saros, as we saw what NASA breaks down, is the same cycle. Let me see here. Right, so 18.03 years, which is the synchronizing of all 3 of these, right? 223 synodic months, 241 draconic months, 239 anomalistic months. So as he called
You
them.
mean I don't know what gravity into account?
Isn't that crazy? And he said all you need is a stick in your yard and a watch, and you can predict eclipses.
Shout out to
no
Heliocentric
gravity.
Steve. What a homie.
That anyone could do it with the math of grade school. Yeah. So all this hip hype that you need Newton and only the globe can do it, and this special book that I bought and it has the secret sauce that can only be like, no, nonsense. It's, if you're paying attention, right, we're in the realm of kinematics, observation, and periodicities only. But so if we bring it to how we would describe those three different periodicities, right? So he calls them what do you call them? New moons to nodes to perigees. He just named them what they are, right? So those are all different types of months. Now, new moon to new moon, right? That's one that I think we have a better explanation for. Oh crap.
He's a good boy. Or good girl.
He's a boy. But his girlfriend is outside now. That's why he's like going crazy.
Yeah, Hank's being good. There haven't been anybody walking by, so he was scaring people yesterday. Oh yeah, I started a new GLOBEBUSTERS weekend update
I saw that.
on Saturday mornings. Yeah. So if there's any stuff you guys want me to put into the description or anything like that, let me know. And I got the Discord server on there. I know you guys do stuff weekly there. Anybody that's doing stuff weekly, I'm trying to put them in the description, and then I'll just cover all. But I shared that video, the one you just showed yesterday. Yeah.
Nice.
I enjoy your guys' sense of humor.
Nice. We just start steel manning the globe as hard as we can, and we start giggling or whatever.
Yeah, but it's more than that. It's like some people watch Archer and they only laugh at certain parts, and then other people laugh at all the jokes. Like, you guys get all the jokes. Yeah.
Hey, Alan, can you mute my audio for everyone so I can play this video that I didn't remove audio from?
Done.
Excellent.
So you want me to leave the audio off, you're saying?
Yeah. You can hear me talk and not the music, right?
I don't hear anything. Have you muted?
I hear you. I hear
I mean,
you.
I have the presentation muted.
Yeah, I think that's fine for the rest of it until I let you know. I think that's fine.
Yeah, just let me know.
Yep. So this right here is the synodic month, and this is the flat Earth interpretation of that, right? As the moon goes around and chases the sun, the closer it gets, the least luminous it becomes. As it catches up, that's the new moon. As it passes again, it starts to wax again, right? So the luminosity increases direct proximity with the sun. So as it gets further away from the sun, it gets brighter. The full moon is when it's at its furthest point from the sun. So that cycle certainly goes both ways. It can be interpreted from either model, right? The synodic month, the lunar phase, specifically coinciding with the perigee and with the position of the sun and the moon. Now, onto the node, right? The time it takes for the node, well, that one's super easy. If the moon is making a circuit and it has, solstice, equinox, and lunar nodes, that's just the time it takes for it to go from this node around to this node again. That's all that is. And then perigee, which would be the closest point on its elliptical orbit, would just be a similar thing. It would be the exact position over here. If this is the position closest to Earth's center, then as it goes around, then it'll be back to this position. And those are the three lunar periodicities. So there's nothing heliocentric exclusive in there. What people like McToon like to say is, well, it depends on the 3D moon sun syzygy needs to be heliocentric. And no, what it depends on, as I just said, and as our buddy Steve corroborated, is those three lunar periodicities, which can be interpreted easily by us, right? The moon's close to the sun. The moon crosses a specific point in its node. The moon crosses the specific point in its slightly elliptical, more circular orbit. Boom.
Sounds a little too easy to understand.
Right? Like,
I'm gonna need some heliocentric math. I need to know how much the moon weighs before I can start talking about these predictions. I just don't feel comfortable using a street post and a protractor. It doesn't seem like that should be legal.
Doesn't seem that way, because they tell you that Fred Espenak is a genius and he did it by himself and published this book, and you should buy his Atlas of the World so that you can get all his maps that he wrote, right? Like, he's the genius. NASA did it, pay NASA. But did NASA really come up with that? As we're going to see in just a minute. No, No, and actually, they attribute it all to our boy Fred Espenak over here. We're going to sail through. Who the hell is Fred? Well, Fred doesn't really work for NASA. He did some consignment work, and he traveled the world, and he went to visit all the ancient cultures, and he pretty much pulled from all the ancient works of all the old cycles and cyclical nature, things like the Antikythera, things like the lunar and the old school Metonic cycles and the old calendars, and he came up with his 5 millennium canon of solar eclipses, with which he essentially just stole an older canon and added a little bit in the beginning and a little bit at the end to round it out. But what he's famous for is this: the 5 millennium canons of solar eclipses. Now, most notably, it's separated into solar and lunar eclipses. Now, there's no reason why you would separate these, as we have been showing, right? They align cyclically and they keep occurring. There's no need to separate solar and lunar unless you're trying to divide people from being able to identify the pattern that comes out in the cycle. So NASA's official website, if you actually go there, will cite Fred Espenak. They will take zero responsibility for eclipses, eclipse predictions, eclipse 3D modeling. They will blame it all on Fred. Fred did all of these, and because of Fred, they have this. Now, what Fred pulled from, and in fact what he references, something called the Canon of Eclipses, which is published in 1887.
What are our taxes going for? This guy's doing it for free, and NASA just points at him. What are we paying the people at NASA to do? What if this guy's wrong? Like, are they double checking his work?
Well, I think we paid NASA to pay Fred.
To pay Fred? Okay. Okay.
Technically, we paid Fred. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, that's just crazy, man.
Fred has his website you can go to buy his books, his atlases, his solar eclipse photographs, plaques, predictions, maps. He's got the whole thing, the whole shebang. But again, if you look into it, he's even referenced this particular work, this Canon of Eclipses, 1887, in the Imperial Academy of Sciences. Now, what sort of information was available in 1887? Couldn't possibly be same sort of stuff that Fred is selling. Well, let's go to TikTok and see what we find. Wait a second.
Is there audio for this?
Oh, sorry. Yep, we need audio again.
8,000
Gotcha.
eclipses. So this is a Pulsar's Canon of Eclipses. 1887 is the publication date. It has 8,000 eclipses computed in tabular form. My favorite part is in the back, though. We have these really cool maps of eclipse paths. And if we flip to this
No, they ripped off Fred.
page,
Fred ripped off them.
page is all the eclipses from 2008 to 2030. And if we look really carefully over here, we can see what this says. It says 4 in Roman numerals, which is April 8th, 2024, and there is the path.
Right, so that's a nice picture of this eclipse book over here. Canon.
So did Fred do any of it?
No. Well, Fred took his claim to fame. He pretty much added dynamic terrestrial time. So he added an addendum for delta T, and he filled out a couple precursor and post eclipses. So he filled out the cycle from before, and he added a bunch towards the end, and he published them saying, look, all the eclipses. Notice that there's only 5,000 years of eclipses that he published. That should tell you something. NASA published a whole thing of 25,000 years of eclipses where they just repeat the cycle, but they're just trying to guise it because there's only ever been about 5,000, it turns out, as was what Fred published. If we look at the data,
they had to bolster it with just unlimited data sets of repeating cycles that have never been witnessed, even though you can literally rewind it to the first one. Can you explain that a little bit, or does that come a little later?
Definitely coming up. Coming up. But yeah, so if there's only a certain finite amount of cycles, right, and that doesn't coincide with your theory of evolution and tiny adaptations of, humans and fish frogs evolving out of dust that came out of nothing that gravitationally attracted itself over 13 billion years, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to need to pad those years out. So we'll definitely get to that. But within this book, and I did find it and look at it, you'll see that it has a canon very similar to what Fred has. And here's Fred's over here for comparison. But we'll look at some of the data here. So here is again, and this is 1887. So well before Fred and NASA and all of that. Same eclipse, the same data. It's got the telemetry. It's got sunrise, sunset, the noon, the moon, perigee, and apogee, where the moon's going to be. It's got latitude and longitude, which if you're a globulist, you can try to argue that that's the globe, but of course that's just the celestial coordinate system, the two-sphere model, the terrestrial and celestial spheres mirrored one from the other. That's why right ascension and declination converts neatly to latitude, longitude using the right hour angle transformation of 15 degrees, which is 4 minutes per degree or whatever. So if we compare the old school canon to what Fred has, and again, separated from lunar in the solar, here's the solar criteria, right, on the side. You can go from left to right. He's got the catalog number over here, which is just the sequential order of what he chose to start with. 0. Canon plate, which is a little bit referencing how he depicts them on the maps later. Calendar date, by far the most tricky aspect of eclipse prediction. As I downloaded all this data and put it in the spreadsheet, the calendar date is what tripped me up the hardest, because I didn't figure out all the stuff that we went into today. Was a learning experience, right? All the different types of calendars and chronology and intercalary insertions and offsets, etc. TD of greatest eclipse, that's just the time expressed in terrestrial dynamic time, which we'll go into a little bit. It's an astronomical standard. Good old delta T, which is the delta change time in seconds between terrestrial and universal. So it's the irregular difference between sidereal and regular sort of clock time, right? The star's time and clock time. Lunar number, which is just a sequential having to do with part of the lunar cycle. Saros number, we know that's a different sort of aggregation that they try to confuse people with, as far as I'm concerned. The eclipse type, which is categorized as total, annular, or partial, that's over here. QLE is a quantifier for the different types, so N and P get different notations for what type of geometry is occurring. The mathematical parameters would be gamma. Gamma is probably the one they would argue the most. It's a parameter expressing how central the eclipse is, and that's what determines all the rest of the eclipses. Measures the minimum distance from the axis of the moon's shadow to the Earth's center and the theoretical sort of fundamental plane coordinate system as they measure for the penumbra and umbra for lunar. Eclipse magnitude is the fraction of the sun's diameter covered by the moon at maximum eclipse. So that's just a predictive factor for how much of the sun or moon is covered, really. And then latitude, longitude, appearing where it occurs on the graticule. Good old sun, alt, and as, so direction and elevation of the sun, and the path, width, and duration, so how long it lasts in the path lane for determining the central line. Phew. So that's all you need for all central solar eclipses. If we go to lunar eclipses, they're a little different. They start differing over here, or when you start to get the penumbral magnitude, which is when the moon's diameter is immersed in the penumbra, versus the umbral magnitude, which is a fraction of the moon's diameter in the umbra. So these are similar to the solar disk being before, but they're to predict the path of the shadow on the moon. I mean, on the Earth. Now, if you were to string all these together, as I did in my spreadsheet, and put them all together, you have a more complete rendition, which I titled, I think, Flurf Magic up here. When we started predicting eclipses way back when people weren't listening, right? It's all based on cycles. No one's predicting anything. But here's all of the sort of parameters explained. We went over these together and separate, but here's it all sort of explained. Here's what my spreadsheet looks like when you're trying to lay them out. Delta T, we touched on a little bit, but is quickly the difference in terrestrial dynamic time and arithmetic difference in real time. So I called it oscillation rate of cesium time, right, or clock time, because they say atomic clocks, have to coincide with themselves, but really it's based on the oscillation rate of cesium and the magnetic field and the constancy, versus sidereal rotation. That's what delta T is. So the time it takes the stars to go around apparently isn't exactly 23 hours and 56 minutes. It's a little bit off. And over time, this discrepancy comes up. So delta T, as Fred pointed out in his claim to fame, occurs over such a long time, 203 seconds and 2100. So 442 seconds off over 2,000 years. That's what he's claiming, and that's what the significance of delta T is. But it is the irregular rate of the sidereal rotation of the Earth. So they would translate it to Earth spin, right? They said the Earth spin isn't constant. In the real world, the spin of the stars isn't quite exact. And that's what I would say about that. So back to Dimbleby, our boy here, who's predicting a series of teams of eclipses. Now, here's his big breakthrough, which is how we're going to visualize eclipses. He says there are 36 eclipses in each section, which at 18 years occur over 648 years. And he says that this it changes a little bit because of intercalary time, but he says he was indebted to George Airy, who pointed him in the direction of that eclipse canon that we just went over, verified the plates of eclipses, for where the 1262 period is observed. And he said that, hey, the 18 years are formed by this many lunations, 223, called the Saros, and he went through and published his own eclipse cycle, one of 651 years, to work with both solar and lunar eclipses. How about that? Right? So he's going to have his eclipse cycle to work with both solar and lunar, integrating both on the spot. And he, of course, is a heliocentric globularist, right? So pay no mind to his reference diagram in his book. Of course, that is his interpretive framework. I'm using him as a reference because he did great work anyway on the chronology, right? Regardless of his belief. So he's dating all of the eclipses back to the Bible. So he's trying to find the date of creation by trying to find the first eclipse. Once you understand that every eclipse is a numerative in a sequence of some sort of 18-year, 11-day, and 10-hour cycle, right? Then you can say, well, when was the first eclipse? If every eclipse I'm seeing now is actually a repercussion of a subsequent eclipse that has once occurred, right? If every eclipse is just another eclipse that has occurred, then there is a first and zero eclipse. Then there should be a way to track down and unwind the cycle back to its origin, back to the year zero. So let's see, he says over here, the period between eclipses and reoccurrence is 6,581 days, as we went over in depth, 18 years and 10 to 11 days. And he says these extra days produce 3 eclipses over the course of 54 years. This is an exogemalist cycle, as we said before. And of going using the intercalary years and the Hebrew calendar to mark out, based on this, the reciprocal date to form this intercalary cycle, right? So he says the Greenwich Observatory, which we know was heavily involved in the creation of longitude and latitude and the only map system with the graticule in the 1700s and the nautical astronomy. So he got them to coincide that they were trying to register for the optical phenomenon to get the whole of history into confusion because of what the Greenwich Observatory did, essentially, right? It says, therefore, under present circumstances, astronomy is divided into 2 sections, nautical astronomy and chronological astronomy. The Greenwich Observatory was established by our government for the purpose of nautical astronomy, and as its years are not those of planetary motion, but legislative, any intelligent mind will at once see they cannot be applicable for registering natural phenomenon. Or in other words, the disastrous result is all of history is thrown into confusion. So our boy set out to fix that. He tried to analyze all of history to put it in the proper cycle. And what he did was marvelous. He recognized that within the smaller micro of the 18-year lunar cycle is a larger great astronomical cycle of 641 years, repeating 36, right? So it's 2 of these, right? 36 of 18 years equals this 641 years, and that itself gets repeated into this 5,841 year cycle. But we'll get into that towards the end. This is from page 122 of his book, All Past Time. What he found, and I'm just going to cut right to the chase here, by aligning all 5 lines of astronomical time and this eclipse cycle with all known biblical historicity and the Feast of Kings, chronology, the hereditary, the signs, he aligned that of those, there's only been this many cycles, right? So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we're in the 10th cycle. There's only been, here's year 0, here's the first eclipse. If you unwind this cycle, then the world would be approximately 6,025 years old today, because he wrote his book in 1861 and he had dated the world at that point to be 5,861 years old based upon the decomposition of this lunar cycle, and then the corroboration with the solar cycle, the historicity of the Bible, the transits of the planets of Mars and Mercury. So, structure of his new eclipse cycle that he put together, right, is combines lunar and solar synchronization. So he uses 7 Metonic cycles. That's what ends up being 649 years. And it ensures that Sabbaths, eclipses, and transits occur on the same calendar dates. That's the beauty of this cycle. And of course, combines the antediluvian and the ancient Hebrew solar cycles with planetary transits of Mercury and Venus. I think I said Mars before, that's my bad, and biblical chronology, so that they unwind this 649-year cycle to date the entire world based on astronomical observations. So again, each cycle here is 70 eclipses, right, which takes about 1,300 years. And they're trying to qualify it as Saros cycles, as they count one every 18 years. But again, if you're counting chronologically as you're watching to an observer, 70 eclipses occur in that order. And he used this cycle, all now knows the exogenous cycle, right? 54 years, which is 3 of these, within this to date it and keep it synchronous. So it has mathematical harmony and perfect repetition, which he used to validate biblical dates. Now, I'm going a little bit quick here because it's all kind of the same stuff, but here is his eclipse chronometer, right? 70 eclipses form the natural team, which by continually occurring in 18 years cause each eclipse to recur after 18 years. So he makes this discovery and then uses this to chronologically date the whole world based on times of the Bible and all astronomical observations. So real quick, we'll go through what that looks like as a team, right? He says the common team of eclipses that were to occur. And actually, let me jump ahead real quick, because what happens is it occurs in this order. So here's a team of 70 eclipses, right? And they occur in this order every time. So here's the key. This picture looks like a solar. That's a total solar. This is a partial solar. This is a total lunar. This is a partial lunar. So for a team of 70, they occur in this order, and then this order repeats each and every time. So they have a solar.
That's amazing.
Right? This is the part I couldn't get over. So total solar, partial lunar, total solar, total lunar, partial solar, all around we go. And that cycle repeats. And what he's mapping out here is he's matched that cycle to historical dates. So he knows which from the character and type of eclipses, based on the Hebrew calendar and based on the repetition of the lunar periodicities that we just went over, he's going to be able to mark, based on his interpretation of the calendar, when each of these occurs. And turns out when you do it, it makes the same sort of mark as we saw on the lunar calendar, right? The lunar cycles would progress laterally like this across the calendar, as we were to see. And he's marking out these two teams. So he's got the following consecutive teams of 70. So he took a team of 70 for one and a team of 70 for two. And we're going to go mark these out later, and we're going to show that they're exactly the same in the nature. But this is team 1 and team 2. And he occurs when this date and when this date occurs. And they're all in the different years. So he marked them all the way through, mapped them all the way out. That's just the blown up from the top, blown up from the bottom. Here's what it looks like. And he's got all the chronological dates mapped out. I will link the book for everyone to read. It's only 125 pages. Everybody should check it out. I have it on PDF. It's super cool, super good read. So here's the team of 70. As you can see, it spans this many years. So he's got from 1500 to 1702, I think, from over here. And here's how it looks if you were to historically date it. So again, here's a team of 18 appearing graphed out, and on the outside, we can see he picked 2 random Saroses and he lined them up. So here's Saros 9, here's Saros 10. And again, you have the same sort of eclipse happening in the same order, under the same Saros, for the same conditions all the way through. And that continues to happen, right? So we got total with the same sort of characteristics occurring. So total solar. If you picked up over here, it turns it, from solar, total lunar, to partial lunar, total lunar, partial solar, total lunar, because in each character you get 1,260 eclipses if they were to repeat, right? And if you were to take that whole cycle and to just line it up every time, like here's the 44th, same type, total lunar, total partial, all the way through, and each Saros cycle is indicative of this repeating cycle within it. So the character and type of eclipses is repeated within this 70 eclipse cycle. So to give us a visualization of how that occurs in the heavens, right? You have this one eclipse occur here. Remember, the stars are rotating. So then that eclipse occurs over here 18 years later, and then over here, and then over here, and then over here, and here, all the way around 36 times to give us 1/2 of that cycle. So when you get 2 of these, then you get 2,520 eclipses, which is how we get the giant cycle. And of course, again, to visualize, the same eclipse occurs every 18 years for a total of 36 times within 651 years. And that gives you the greater astronomical year, or the greater astronomical cycle of 2,520
It
eclipses.
makes you gay.
Super gay if you guys got an astronomical year.
Dude, that blew me away. I had no clue. I had never heard that before.
Yeah, me either, man. It's what drove this whole presentation. Someone named Patricia Halliday gave me a presentation on this 2 years ago on our Discord, and I was like, "What?" I had to go. Then I had to go read the book and figure it out. Some of these diagrams I stole from her. Some I stole from other people. Some I made myself. But she really was the person who showed me the book from which all of this information is based. That's on Dibbleby's All Past Time.
This place is so amazing. The more I learn about it, the more just in awe I am of how it works.
And then I'm in awe of how they tried to obscure it from us, right? Let's give you let's give you eclipses in a solar appendium and then a separate lunar appendium so that you'll never see them interact and you'll never get to repeat this 70 eclipse cycle, right? If you were to think about it, they occur like this around the world. But then if you were to think about how the stars move, right, and how the zodiac progresses, then it would be like this. They would move like this. It would be just processing around, right? So as the stars process, then this eclipse cycle would process. And that's how we get the interconnecting, oscillating cycle. So real quick, the point of his book, right, is he's got 5 astronomical lines of time. So the reason that he knows all the dates of all these is, of course, he wrote a book dating biblical chronology. That's a separate book. But within this book, he uses historical dates and periods of scripture and secular, the lunar cycle, right, the solar cycle, the Vox day, which is the eclipse line, so the eclipse chronometer, all of the eclipse cycles that we went over. So solar, lunar, eclipse, and the transits all synchronize, all forming their own teams, which synchronize with year 0, all starting the cycles of the sky at the same point. If all the cycles are repeating cycles, then there had to be a point of origin. And this guy has nailed it. He said, based on all the dates and all the cycles that you can look at, it comes back to 0 date. And that 0 date he ties with creation. So again, using the intercalary periods, right? He's using this to describe based on the leap years added, based on the lunar solar calendar, based on the Hebrew number of months lining up with the complete lunar cycle. He can use the eclipse chronometer to date civilization. And that's how we got to the same date as we were at. So he actually did, each one of these could do its own presentation, like how I did it. This is on eclipses. You could do a whole presentation on the transits of Venus. They have the same sort of repetitious pattern. They occur in the same character after a certain amount. They occur in specific teams as well. And he outlined all of those teams. It's a little bit more to go into right now, but they occur over and over and over again in the same period of 486 years, right? So that's the transit of Venus teams. He's got the 5th line of time, which are transits of Mercury, which again occur in the same team fashion with the same repetitious cyclical nature. He says it occurs every 92 years. Afterwards, a team of 15 transits is added to one, and then those 15 transits repeat and repeat, and they all coincide to come back to this, to come back to the year being 0, right? And that's when all the sky clocks align at 0. And of course, if you were to do the math based on when he wrote this book in 5861, which was 1861, he dated it was 5,861st year, then that would make this year 6,029. We might need volume again real quick for the last part. Alan, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Ignore the gay Harry Potter music, but this would coincide with a Bible.
This Bible from 1813 has something very interesting. It is a facts page that contains a list of people and events in chronological order. It says, whereupon we reckon that from Adam unto Christ are 3,947 years, 6 months and 10 days. And from the birth of Christ to this present year is 1814 years. Then the whole sum and number of years, from the beginning of the world unto this present year is 5,788, 6 months, and the said are the...
So literally, I think that was a 25-year reprint, right? Because this book was printed after a certain time with a copyright. But if you were to add that 5788 with the 25-year reprint, it comes out within 1814. It equals the 6,025-year date that we would give it today. So maybe all old school Bibles printed before 1700 gave us the proper chronology with proper listings so that we could use the sky clock to see how long we've all been here. Just a thought. To corroborate that, we have our boy Faminko, who is a chronologist who wrote 12 books on chronology and how it's been corrupted. And some of the favorite quotes he put here is, history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who weren't there. I like that one. And of course, George Orwell, who controls the past, controls the future, who controls the present, controls the past. Couldn't be more true. What Faminko realized is that when he was analyzing lunar cycles and the eclipse chronometer, he noticed a discrepancy in what he called coefficient D in the theory of lunar motion, which just equates to the time component of the time component on the historical scale. So he's noticing a discrepancy in delta T. Over a long period of time, delta T varies, but not only varies, it jumps by 1,000 years or so. So there's a definite insertion in addition of 1,000 years of chronological historicity, so to say, in all the cultures. He analyzed Chinese culture, Arabic culture. They all have the same stories, but they have the same history inserted off by 1,000 years. So he noticed the eclipse cycle and noticed the variation in delta T, and noticed that too was covering up 1,000-year insertion. Now that is also its own presentation, but just to sort of rush through here, again, lunar acceleration parameter D is how he dates the chronometer. In this one book that I read about him, I only read the first book. He corroborates what we just went over as far as the age of our civilization and the inaccuracies of history with the insertion of 1,000 years. Now, taking on what we just went into account, right? How the sky clock predicts when and where the time of the month, the time of the year, the time of the season, and all of that. If only there were ancient devices that knew how to do this before heliocentricity. Well, has anyone heard of the Antikythera mechanism? It's usually something that people say vaguely and then don't know any of the specifics about. We're going to break that down real quick because here is exactly what an Antikythera mechanism is. And knowing what we know about the gears and the gears and the prescribed cycles, we're going to take a look. So, of course, we have inside the machine's got 69 gears. It tracks the position of Sun, Moon, Mars, and Jupiter. It has a 53-tooth gear for the variable motion of the Moon. It's also tracking the 36-day month cycle. The pin and the tab over here for the motion of the Moon. Over here is it's tracking the average rotation of the Moon. The 188-tooth gear is exactly what's, I think, one of the synodic months. So that's tracking the lunar 223-tooth gear over here. This device is tracking lunar periodicities to a degree that we would be shocked with, right? So it's tracking the draconic, synodic, and anomalastic months using gears and dials, right? It's tracking the specific lunar periodicities that you would need to predict eclipses. Beyond that, it's telling you the time, the day, the time of the season. The main drive is telling you, where the nodes of the moon are. It's keeping track of the position where the nodes are, right? And if anyone has heard, there's actually another device that was before this that the ancients were using called the Minoan eclipse calculator, which is a couple thousand years predating the Antikythera. So this was used as a basic sundial, latitude detector, and analog eclipse predictor using the same sort of synchronous amounts to use the same periodicity of 18 years and 11 days to start predicting eclipses. It even had a long node to tell you which node it was near, whether it was near the lunar or the solar node, right? So this is a depiction of the ecliptic as someone tried to interpret through a modern lens what this ancient device was capable of. And finally, if you were to think about analogs today, there was a time when all clocks were sky clocks, right? If anyone recognizes this would be the Prague clock, right? And everyone has speculated that maybe it's representation of the moon map and the oscillating sun. Like, no, it's got nothing to do with it. If only we knew what each one of these meant. Oh, wait, we did. We can figure that out. So, of course, starting with the colors in the background here, it shows twilight, dusk, and daylight, right? So, based on whether it's blue, yellow, or dusk, right? So, nighttime, twilight, dusk, and daylight. That's what the colors mean. Central point represents the Earth, right, and Prague's position. Roman numerals around the side are old school timekeeping. They do a little bit different. Gothic numerals are news timekeeping. Italian hours, they call it. The golden hand keeps count from the time of 24. That's the hours. The curved lines would be 12 unequal hours. So this is hemispheres sort of when it needs to do day length starting from dusk, right? And that's to account for the discrepancy between the sun and the moon over the seasons. The zodiacal ring is here with the zodiacs around the outside, so you can count the position of the sun in the zodiac, which is important when you're trying to see what month it is. Of course, the sun itself is being tracked, moving around the dial, showing the time of day. It's also depending on where it is in the colored position, whether it's twilight, dusk, or nighttime. We have the moon icon, the moon being tracked. Of course, we have the lower calendar dial, so it's tracking the central medallion is Prague's Old Town. It's got the outer ring doing the lunar phases with the major feast days. That's over here. Zodiac medallions representing each month and the zodiac sign, and of course the 4 figurines around the dial. So this wonderful clock shows us a whole bunch of cool stuff that they took out of clocks today. Otherwise, everybody would be able to read the sky clock. If we were to break it down at a quick glance, right, the feature over here, what it shows, I'm just going to go through Roman numerals, is the current Prague time. Different time is in the Gothic. They got the sun icon for the sun's position, the moon's position in phase, sidereal time, solar time, the day of the year, feast days. Literally, if you were going to have one timepiece, this would be it, right? This is what you would need to predict everything. And when you need a sky clock, this is how all clocks used to look, right? And of course, you can use just this to make eclipse predictions based on what I said today and what Steve corroborated. The Prague astronomical clock can be used to predict eclipses. It's got, the periodicities of the sun and the moon and the points where the moon intersects with the ecliptic plane, right? Shows the zodiac ring of the sun's position, where the sun currently occupies, where the moon currently is, and how eclipses are predicted. In fact, there used to be something called a dragon hand on all of these clocks, which would specifically be used to predict eclipses and match the Metonic cycle. So it would be a long oscillating ring. Oh, it looks like I didn't get it. I had a picture of it.
Such a cool video you put out earlier today, just on this with the clock, all the different clocks from around the world.
Yep.
Yeah, so cool.
Nice. I was going to use that too. What I do is I put out videos on the week about that I'm going to use in the presentation. I put them out piecemeal, right? Because the ending thing is, well, all clocks used to be sky clocks, right? I think we can turn off music again now, and I think we're good. If you want to mute me.
Yep.
All right, and here we go. All right, so all clocks were sky clocks at some point. That's how you used to read the Prague clock, but the Prague clock wasn't alone. All of the old school clocks used to look like this, right? If you look at all of the ones over here, they all had the same.
They've always been sky clocks.
But they took away the sky clock, right? So they're telling the ecliptic position of the sun and the moon, the zodiac, twilight, dusk, when the moon is crossing it, the perigee, the apogee, the lunar nodes. All of these clocks have all of this stuff in it, amazingly, right? So again, Roman numerals, time, same cyclical nature of all the sky clocks, right? So if we're trying to use clocks to tell time, we've been doing it wrong because we're looking at a 24-hour digital dial like a numpty, right? And so what they did to the Prague clock is they added a globe to it because a bunch of people were looking at it like I was, to showing how the cyclical nature of the sky debunks heliocentricity. But we'll just ignore that because here's what it's actually looking like as it tells time. So you can see this is the dragon hand. This is the dragon hand. So this would be if it occurs over here, a solar eclipse. If it occurs over here, lunar eclipse. So this is the hand that was absent from the Prague clock to show. So yeah, we started with the Germanic calendar, and that shows how everything is connected, right? So we started with that calendar to explain what it looks like, and here is what it actually looks like. So that's why I like to start and end with it. This is the perfect calendar. I take into account lunar periodicities, the lunar cycle, seasoning, aligning with the solar calendar perfectly. So that's pretty much the whole presentation. I think we went a little bit quick, almost 2 hours, man. I thought it would be sooner.
Nice, man.
Not bad for a speed run. Let's see if we got the world record. You were 3 seconds off. You got to do it again. Got a hard reset.
Well, it took. I don't think Rob Skiba ever finished his full presentation. I saw it a couple different times, and every time he'd go to do it at different events, like Karen gave him 3 hours to get his presentation done, and he still couldn't fit his whole presentation in that time period. So no, perfect, Shane. That was awesome, man.
Nice. Questions, guys? Thoughts, concerns, comments?
I got a couple of things to add. So I really liked what was his name, Dimbleby or Bimbleby?
We can call him Bimbleby, but his name was Dimbleby.
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 No, he deserves a full name. He's Dimbleby.
Whoa, not even Alanism?
No. So what he pointed out is that there was, the nautical astronomy and what was it? The planetary one. And it was like the one, right? The nautical one has to be perfect. Has to be the same every year, otherwise you can't use it for accuracy, right? So and he went into how it's been like legally dictated by the king to, make this system the one that we're going to use. And I think that was an extremely important separation because people might think that, they're intertwined, that they're not different, because of the assumptions that have to be made for the two to get the two to work. Because remember how in the nautical astronomy, so to speak, to make that work, you assume everything is at the same distance, equidistant web and all that, right? And then for funsies astronomy, you can draw triangles in the sky that converge at infinity and say that the distance to that convergence point is hundreds and millions of years in time, right? Not even a distance, it's time. It's so far away, it's time away from you. It's not even distance anymore. It's crazy, dude. So that's a really, really important thing to point out. And then the other thing was the Anatoly Faminko going through. I read through a couple of his, and he goes through different civilizations and whatnot. And what he pointed out for China was really interesting because you know how we have the story of Tycho Brahe and Kepler and all this, and he invented these astronomical tools that had never been used before, so that he could make his measurements, so he could produce the most accurate catalog, blah blah blah, right? So that's Tycho. China has one, and they have their own Tycho that did the same thing, and then this is the thing that I like the most about it, right? Is that the Chinese Tycho, because there's some missing data sets from Tycho or whatever. There's like some missing period stuff. So you'll never believe what's missing from the Chinese. The same stuff that's missing from the English. Yeah, dude, it's ridiculous. They just have, it's the same story repeated over and over again. So are they all in on it? Well, I don't know, but at some point, so they all agreed or happened to get the same missing data points so that they could all have the same cooperative story.
Man, if you're gonna lie to a bunch of people about who and what they are, how better than to first seize the notion of time from them, so that they can't actually look at the sky and count how many years it's been. And then you can tell them, actually, it's been 13 billion years, and you evolved from a retarded fish frog who humped a monkey who came up and crawled up from the thing, to get that story to sell, you need to have those years. And if you look at the sky and you can see it, the years ain't there. You could be like, but there's only been this many cycles, you fool.
I think there's a squirrel in there somewhere between the
squirrel, fish, frog, yeah.
Frog and the monkey, though. Oh, man.
Yeah, no, that was a great presentation, man. It was much needed.
Nice.
Yeah, well done.
Are
you guys interested in doing these on, for other people, like on their channels, maybe?
Yeah, for
sure. You guys are getting really good at these. Like, this stuff should be shown to high schoolers in school type of stuff.
Like, from what I showed you, right? Why would you then take all of the eclipse cycles and separate them, one half into lunar, put them in a red book, one half into solar, put them in a green book, and separate them? Like, give one class one and one the other. Like, okay, guys, figure out how the sky clock works. Like, what? No, you obviously need them both. And our boy Dimbleby realized that and put them all together in the real cycle.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. All right, so that concludes season 13, episode 16 of GLOBEBUSTERS, and this was also our season finale. I forgot to mention that in the beginning. Season finale. We'll be returning in mid-July for season 14.
Dude, that's my favorite GLOBEBUSTERS season ever, but I might be biased.
That's awesome. Yep. All right, so let's check the chat here, see what we got going on. Any questions from the lads?
I didn't see any coming through. I was trying to keep an eye on chat, but you kept pulling me away, man. I was just locked in to the Prezi.
Same.
Nice. Here, I'll link the slide deck in Canva so anyone can go in there and print the slides. They're all HD and super clear. You can look at the breakdown of the Antica Thera for yourself, post it on Twitter, whatever you want to do. And then I'll get the link for Dimbleby's book so everyone can share. I put it in Discord. I'll put it in YouTube. There we go.
Nice. Cami, would you like to join us? I'm taking that as a yes.
The season, sure. Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Great
Cami.
show. I was in the background watching this for the first time. I have pages of notes,
Nice.
old school analog, questions, notes on things I want to match up with it. You guys, great, great job. I'll be rewatching. Love where you took it. I can even like look at jump offs from there on different places to take it. But this is really good. This is what GLOBEBUSTERS is supposed to be. And thank you guys so much for upping our level and making it what it needs to be again. Again, I can't tell you how pleased. How many? Again, I have a million questions that are going to get you heavy tech. And matching up, patterns and that, but you see a lot. And I can't believe how much material put in there, and there's a lot of your graphics in that I want.
That's why
And
I
I'm
share the
excited.
Canva.
Like again, in the future, I won't ruin the show by joining it with my like voice and doing on the things, but I am taking part in the background. And there, again, I love the direction we're going. Preponderance of evidence, excellent. So great season, guys. Gonna miss you while you're gone. We have Liz coming, but we're going to do that. We have Zack is doing the Saturday morning show. And I'm not quite sure. We probably will break a little bit on tech while Liz is in the area and that too. So we'll have to see on that.
Nice.
Yeah,
and there might be a surprise Iru Landucci presentation in the mid-break there. He's been visiting family, he's been away, but when he gets a minute, he would like to come through and do a little prezi on optics, I believe.
Excellent.
So whenever he's available, we will, of course, make the channel available.
Excellent. I miss Iru and his presentations. And this
He's-
pronunciation
he's-
of Jesuit.
He set the standard for pronouncing Jesuit
Jesuit.
and presentations.
That's right. That's right. Great person all around. Love Arrow. I can't wait. And again, we are picking up and going places again. So thank you again. I'm gonna say goodnight, everybody. But that was really you outdid yourself on the presentation. I'm impressed. It's the GLOBEBUSTERS worthy. Good night, everybody.
What a stamp. Thank you,
Thanks,
Cami.
Cami. All right. Well, thanks everyone for the continued support. I know this was a new transitional period here, but thanks for sticking with us, and we will be back in July. Take care, everyone. Have a good summer. We'll see you at the midpoint. We'll reconvene and see what the turtle in the sky is doing.
Love y'all.
See you at 1/2 turtle oscillation, Alan.
See you 1/2 turtle.